Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I am going to give it just one more minute because usually it takes people just a second to log into Zoom. So just hold tight and then we'll get started. Yeah. Okay, great. Maddie, if you want to just kick us off quickly since people know you, and then we can get started.
Sure, they at least know my name. Maybe this might be the first time seeing my face, but yeah, I'm Maddie Lippett. I'm Building Policy Manager here at the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, or MIA. Thank you all for coming today. We're just kind of gonna go through the benchmarking ordinance that was recently passed by the village, and just sort of prepare you all for this data jam that's occurring on September 19th for commercial buildings. We will go over even what a data jam is. So if you're still sort of confused as to what that is, we will cover that as well. And just telling you what you need to prepare for that. And then also give some opportunities today for you guys to ask us questions. So yeah, great to see you all here. And I'll pass it over to Allison.
Great. Thanks so much. And yes, thanks all for being here. I think that you'll find this very informative and helpful and hopefully feel ready for this benchmarking ordinance. You can go to the next slide, Maddie. So very quickly, we have a short agenda today. And it may or may not take the entire 90 minutes. Yesterday, when we did it for multifamily buildings, it only took 60 minutes. So we'll see. So quickly, we're going to do some introductions. We'll introduce you to the team here that's going to be helping you. And then we'd like to do some introductions from you all as well, because we know that we have many different building types. And so we just want to get an idea of who we have here today. Then we'll talk about why benchmarking is important. We'll give a brief overview of the ordinance itself. Then we'll talk about what is a data jam. We'll tell you what you need to bring in September and what some of the necessary data is for you to bring. And then, of course, answer questions. So in the meantime, if you don't mind putting yourself on mute, and then when we call on you, just to introduce yourself, just your name, and you can say what your building type is. And I think we're also interested if we have any mixed use building types, because that can be a question that we get. So first of all, I'll just start and say I'm Allison Lindberg. I'm with the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. I don't own any buildings, but I'm here to help you today about your buildings. And then you heard from Maddie Lippett. So I'm going to pass it over to Katie Kaluzny from Illinois Green Alliance.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Kaluzny. I'm the Deputy Director at Illinois Green. I'm going to be helping explain some benchmarking things a little bit later today and answer questions. Also, we'll be there for the data jam in September and bringing hopefully a bunch of volunteers that are experts in portfolio manager and benchmarking to assist everybody. Been helping with this for a long time, and energy benchmarking is one of my favorite things to help with. So looking forward to your questions later.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And then I'd also like for the Village of Oak Park staff just to introduce yourself, Marcella.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcella Bonzi-Keenan. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Village of Oak Park. And I'm here to support especially any of the policy questions or interactions with Village staff.
Great. And Abby.
Hi there, I'm Abby Zielinski. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator at the Village of Oak Park. Also here to help support. Thanks all for joining today.
Great. And then I'm also going to call on Zoya. She is from MIA as well.
Hi, I'm Zoya Aslan. I just started at MIA about a month and a half ago, and I'm here as their new Ray Clean Energy Fellow. So I'm also here to support this ordinance, but I'm also learning about benchmarking and data jams right alongside you.
Great, thanks, Soya. So now I'm just gonna go through the list as I see you on the participants, and I'm going to call on you. And if you would like to unmute yourself and just introduce yourself and say what your building type is or are, if you have multiple buildings, that would be great. And so I'm gonna start, and again, I'm just reading these off of the participant list. So I know sometimes we have nicknames instead of actual names, and I'm sure to butcher some of the pronunciation. So please bear with me. So the first one on my list that I see is Karen Doty.
Hello?
Hello. Great,
Hello.
I can hear you.
Okay. I am with the First United Methodist Church of Oak Park, and I will have a question later that we also share space with a preschool and elementary school in our building.
Wonderful. Good. That'll be a great question, and we'll get to that. Thanks, Karen. Okay, going to the next one I see is Deva Justautas. Oh, I can see your lips moving, but I don't hear you. You are on unmute. I'm not sure why that's not working. I still can't hear you. Deva, maybe you can put your information into the chat. If you can type in into the chat box what your building type is and who you're with, that would be great. And the chat should be located, for me, it's at the bottom of my screen. And then you just click on the chat button. But okay, if you're not able to find it, Deva, just raise your hand on here if you can find that. That sometimes can be weird to find too. And we'll try to help you out with that. Okay, I'm gonna go into the next person, and hopefully David will get you, we'll figure out your audio issue, and then, so that you can participate. Last time we did this yesterday with some multifamily building owners, and people use the chat a lot, so feel free to do that as well. You can ask questions anytime, put any information in there. Okay, perfect. So I see that somebody else is using the chat already. All right, I'm going to call on Richard Alton.
So, Richard Alton, I'm at Euclid Avenue, United Methodist Church, 405 South Euclid Avenue, and it's a multi-use building.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And then I see Eric on the participants list.
I'm Eric Hogan with First Baptist Church of Oak Park. We have a church, and we also have 2 schools.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next one. I see one that's labeled Fire Tablet.
Okay, that might be me because we have a new device we just started using today. I'm from the Academy of Movement and Music. We're in the Bishop Quarter Dance Building. The Academy is the business that inhabits the building, and I'm kind of representing both of those entities. It's a dance studio.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm glad we figured out which one you were too. New technology. Okay, I'm gonna call on Heather Vanderberg.
Hi, everyone. I'm with the First United Church of Oak Park on Lake Street. And as seems to be the trend among churches, we are also share space with a nursery school and with Beyond Hunger Food Pantry.
Great. Okay, next I see iPhone 10 Peg. And I think that one, it might be the one that was in the, oh no, is that Peggy LaFleur? Was that you? Or is that somebody else? Okay, I don't see anybody with the iPhone one jumping off. So Peggy LaFleur, she put it into the chat. She represents the Oak Park River Forest Infant Welfare Society, and they have a clinic at 28 Madison. Thank you, Peggy. I also just want to go back up and again, I apologize if I have really butchered your name, Deva. But she says that I'm the secretary for Our Lady Immaculate Church in Oak Park. So it's good to see that we have some worship facilities represented, and we'll go over a lot of that today. So moving on to the next person that I see on the list, James Taylor.
Good morning. I am Jim Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Facility Management for Continuum Services. We provide the maintenance at American House Senior Living Facility, which is newly open.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. And then I see Joe Veda.
Yes, Joe Veda. I'm with Aria Group Architects. We have the building at 830 North Boulevard, and we're 100% office.
Great. Thank you. Judith Gazaway.
Hi, yes, I'm with First United Methodist Church of Oak Park, along with Karen Doty, who described our facility usage.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being here. Laura Palmer.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Laura Palmer. I'm with Thrive Counseling Center, and we're at 120 South Marion.
Right, thanks, Laura. And Mary Martin.
I'm here. We have a multi-use 100-year-old building with 6 tenant spaces, one of which is metered twice because it's 2 combined spaces. So there's going to be 7 sets of data I have to try to obtain to do this, and it's mixed use.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mary. And we will talk about how you can access full aggregated building data and when we get more into this. And then Michelle Murrin, Toronto Baking.
Hi, yep, Michelle Murin with Toronto Baking Company. We have an office building.
Thank you, Michelle. And let's see, Richard Alton, I've already spoke with. Tori Johnson.
Hi, I am with, the Lake Theater building in Oak Park, movie theater, and there's 3 commercial tenants there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tori. And then West Suburban Montessori School. I see Margot, and then maybe the next one is also admin. So
yes, hello. My name is Margot Murphy. I am with West Suburban Montessori School. We are 1 building on our campus, and we're on East Avenue.
Great. Thank you. Glad that you could be here. And then I'm just going to look through this list one more time to make sure I didn't miss anyone. As you can imagine, this was semi-alphabetical, but then sometimes it was moving around on me. So great. I think that we got to everyone, and the chat is there for you to use for the rest of the day. And we will have a time where it will be very apparent that you can unmute and ask questions. But in the meantime, if you have any questions while we're going through kind of the presentation part of this, feel free to use the chat. We have people on here that are monitoring the chat and can help answer questions like as we're going along. So let's get going, and we'll try to get you guys out of here, but still give you all the information you need. So let's go into the next slide. So first of all, why benchmarking and what is benchmarking? So benchmarking is basically looking at your energy and water use over time to get an idea of how much you're consuming so that you can actually potentially make changes. And what I like to think of this is, if you wanted to start losing weight, the first thing you need to do is step on the scale, because you can't tell if you've actually, had your goal of losing, say, 10 pounds without knowing where you started. And so that's exactly what this is it's just looking at your building over time and trying to get an understanding of how much energy it's consuming. And there have been studies that have shown that just by looking at your energy consumption, that we will start making little changes to decrease that. Just like if you start weighing yourself, you might start thinking a little bit more about what you're eating. So that's what benchmarking is in and of itself against your own building, but you can also benchmark against other buildings that are similar to yours. And that's part of what we're doing with this ordinance. You can move on to the next slide. And then benchmarking is not new, and Oak Park is not the first village or city to do this. This is MIA's Midwest region, and we have a number of municipalities, some of which started 10 years ago, have put benchmarking ordinances in place. So the green and the orange markers that you see here are similar to what Oak Park has passed. So this is not new, and people have been doing this because they have found that it is effective. And you can move to the next slide. So just an overview of Oak Park's ordinance. It's called the Energy and Water Benchmarking Ordinance, and it was passed in February of this year. It includes both water and energy, and the buildings that it covers are public buildings that are owned and operated by the Village of Oak Park, and then privately owned commercial and multifamily buildings over 10,000 square feet. And I know you all know that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And then the method of benchmarking is to use a free software that's called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And that is managed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And it's a web-based tool. So you log in on the internet, and then that will help with the reporting requirements. And then the Village of Oak Park, like many other benchmarking ordinances, has reporting dates, and then requires, after that initial reporting date, annual reporting. So the covered village properties, their initial reporting date has first passed, and we did a data jam with their facilities to help them get all of their buildings benchmarked in Portfolio Manager. And then in 2024, all of that information will be publicly available. And then for non-village properties, which is what you all are, your reporting date, your deadline for your first round of benchmarking is the end of this year, December 31st, 2023. And then in 2024, that information will also become publicly available. And so I just want to call quickly on Marcella from the Village of Oak Park to see if she has anything else she'd like to add about the ordinance here.
Thanks. Thank you. So the only thing I'll add is that we are doing this as part of our Climate Ready Oak Park plan, which is a community plan that was adopted last year. We just had our 1-year anniversary. And the goals are to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions as a community by 60% by 2030, so just 7 years away, and to net zero by 2050. And buildings are a really important part of this. Buildings are about 70% of Oak Park's greenhouse gases as a community, and a lot of that is coming from these larger buildings, commercial buildings and multi-family buildings, both their electricity use and especially their natural gas use. I saw a question in chat, what happens if you don't make the deadline? I can tell you, if you don't make the 2030 and 2050 deadlines, climate change becomes much worse across the globe, but that might not be what you were asking about, Richard. And in fact, today's heat wave is an example of climate change already happening. So I really appreciate you showing up today and your interest in working with us on this benchmarking ordinance, because it's a really important part of figuring out how we get to our carbon action goals. Richard, to your question for the reporting date, There is an enforcement mechanism in the ordinance. It follows the village's typical adjudication process, which really focuses on compliance. So the first thing that happens is village staff will look to see who is out of compliance, reach out to them, find out what is needed, and if there's information or support that we can connect you with to help you do this. And then we'll check in with you at a specified time later and try to help you make that happen. If for some reason a building chooses not to comply, it will go to adjudication, and the administrative law judges set the fee or the fine that might be applicable in that case. So I hope that answers the question, but really the whole point of these workshops today and next month is to help you get through this. So we're doing this well in advance of reporting deadline. We're a good 4 months away from when this has to be done. So I'm hoping by the time of the next workshop, everybody will be finished. We'll get you through that process, and then it'll become much easier going forward.
Great, thanks, Marcella. And I'll just also add, one of the reasons that the Village of Oak Park is putting on these data jams is to help to make sure that you all can meet this deadline. And when you find out what a data jam actually is, hopefully you will feel confident that you'll be able to make this deadline. I also see Richard asks about goals of reduction in energy and water. And I'll just say, as part of this ordinance, this is just to report your annual consumption. Currently, there is no requirement to do any reductions of energy or water of your buildings. This is just to report what you're currently using. And part of the reason for that is so that you can have an understanding of how your building is performing with other buildings that are similar to yours, because maybe you'll find out that, wow, you have a super efficient building, like great, awesome. But maybe you're going to find out that your building is spending 3 times as much on your utility bills as a similar building. And so then maybe you want to go and talk to your utility and figure out if there's any programs that can help make your building use less energy and thus save you money. So that's just the part of this ordinance, is literally just reporting. The goals, I guess I don't know if the village has overall reduction or energy and water goals. So Marcel, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
So we're trying to get to net zero as a community by 2050. That means that every building would be creating as much clean energy as it uses. So it's very high efficiency, and it's also maybe using solar energy, for example, on the rooftop by 2050. This is a goal. This is not a requirement at this point. This is what we're going towards. In terms of our own facilities, we're trying to get to 100% renewable energy for electricity by 2030. That's an internal goal for us.
Great. And I think that gets at Richard's last question there in the chat, which is, does the village have energy reduction? And it sounds like the village has some goals and is working on those specifically for your buildings.
Yes, we're going through a pretty extensive energy audit process right now for all of our facilities to make everything more energy efficient.
Great. These are great questions. Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is the meat and potatoes of all of this, and this is the reason why you're here. But we're going to have data jams in September that you all can attend, and this is a prep meeting for those data jams. So what actually is a data jam? So it is an event to help set up your buildings and Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and that's the reporting tool. And benchmarking itself is not difficult, but the biggest lifting part comes in the beginning to set up your buildings. And it's also the part where inaccuracies might be more prevalent, just because people don't understand what some of the criteria are and how to correctly enter in not necessarily data, but building characteristics. And so in order to make sure that everything is accurate and also to take some of that burden off of your all plates, we've set up these events and we're going to ask you to bring the necessary information, and we're going to sit at computers and we're going to jam it out. And we're just going to get it all done so that when you walk away from this data jam, your buildings will be marked. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that you bring all of the necessary data to the data jam. And that's why we have this prep meeting. So the data jam itself, you will learn about this portfolio manager software. And as I explained, it's a web-based tool. So you just log on the internet. We will benchmark your building by entering in the building data and the utility data. We will also have people there that you'll be connecting with. So in case you have any other future questions, you'll have people that you can contact and that can help and provide assistance, and then answer any other burning questions you have. And then, like I said, the goal is, if you bring all of your data, to have the benchmarking done when you leave. So I also just want to give a shout out to Katie Kaluzny, because she's the one that actually came up with this concept and the name Data Jam. So you guys don't know that you are in like the presence of the initiator of these, but they have been happening across the country and have helped thousands and thousands of buildings be benchmarked. So Katie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, it's great. And I think that we might even play some music. We'll see if you really want to jam while we're data jamming. So it's a lot of fun and hopefully helps you just see how easy it is. But we'll have lots of great people there to help and make sure that all of your questions are answered before, during, and after. If we don't get everything done, you can always contact us after as well.
Great. Okay, well then let's go to the next slide. So what to bring? First thing, because everyone's going to be working on their own buildings, is you need to bring a laptop. And if you don't have a laptop, let us know and we'll make sure that there's one provided for you. But everyone's essentially going to be sitting at their own computer and working on benchmarking their own buildings. And then you need to bring the building characteristic information. And these are the worksheets that were sent out to you previously, and explain for your building type the different types of information. And we're going to go over this today, so don't worry that I'm not just leaving you here there, and we'll go over what some of that information actually means. Then you also need to bring 1 year's worth of utility data. And we got this question a lot yesterday, so I'll try to be really clear. It's actually the data from January 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. So the ordinance is asking for the 2022 data. You need electric, water, and gas. And you need it for the entire building. And thankfully, this is it's not as cumbersome as having to enter in every single meter, unless that's what you want to do. You can do it that way, but there are ways to get the whole building data. And then last but not least, make sure you come, make sure you bring yourself. And if you want, bring another person or two that may be interested in this or that may be helping with the benchmarking in the future. Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about the utility data here? Because I think the next stuff is the building characteristics. And I think we get a lot of questions about the utility data, specifically the ComEd stuff, but we should touch on the others as well.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. So for the electricity data in particular, and again, what Allison and Marcella mentioned is we're benchmarking the whole building. So you need the energy data associated with the entire building, not just the common areas or the bill that you yourself might be responsible for, but we want to understand how energy is used in the entire building. And there's a way to do that without knocking on everyone's door and asking them for their bills. So instead, ComEd has a program called the Energy Usage Data System, or EUDS, and you can request whole building data from ComEd. You have to set up an account, and I'm going to put a link in the chat for how to do that. And you put in your building's address, or if your building is over a range of addresses, all of the addresses associated with that building. so that they can make sure to pull all of the meters and all of the bills associated with that address. And basically what they do is give you a report at the end that's one number for January, one number for February, one number for March. What's the total usage? So you can just enter one number for every month of the year for your whole building. NICOR does it a little bit differently. You have to call and request it. And so that's a little bit different. They don't have the same system as ComEd. And then for the water, you contact the water department in Oak Park and they will provide you that report as a PDF. And so there is a way to do it without asking for bills. If you have fewer than 3 tenants, there might be some other confidentiality forms to sign, but I can get into that with those specific buildings that might have that scenario later on, or talk to you offline about it. Would it be helpful, Allison, if I put that in the chat or showed that on my screen right now?
Yeah, why don't you do that now? That would be great if you don't mind.
Yep. No problem. I'm going to put the link in the chat and then I will share my screen, just so you can follow along if you want to pull it up. What's that? So I just put the link in the chat to this website. It'll also be in a follow-up email that you'll all get as well from Maddie. But this is ComEd, and this is just for electricity data. It's the energy usage data system. And down here, you can request access. So you download this enrollment form, which is a PDF, and then you fill it out and submit it to this email address. You can also, if you click request access, it'll actually open up your email for you to attach this file that you've downloaded. There's also 3 really useful documents down here at the bottom, which is the frequently asked questions. There's actually a webinar you can watch about how you use this software, and a user guide for the step-by-step process to request your data from ComEd. It does take a few days for this to happen, and you really only want one contact at your building to be doing this process, because ComEd isn't going to give a bunch of different people at the building access to this data. They want to know it's just the one person responsible for doing the benchmarking. Once you get access, you'll get an email from ComEd with a login information and a temporary password, and then you'll come back to this website and log in and follow the instructions in this user guide to request your data. It takes a little bit of time to just get it all set up, so that's why we're telling you now, so that you can get the data and have it ready for the data jam.
And then Katie, do you want to speak at all to the automatic uploading portion for ComEd, or should we just wait to do that at the data jam?
I can mention it. I think to start, I would just go ahead and get your 12 months of data from 2022 so that you can have it. But if you're interested, we can show you at the data jam or afterwards. There's actually a way to make this EUDS program share data directly into your portfolio manager account moving forward, so that at the end of every month, your electricity data just goes straight for your building, just goes straight into your Energy Star portfolio manager account. And so you're just ready for the next year as well. But you still do have to request that data separately from NICOR and the water department.
Great. And then speaking of that, thank you so much, Katie. Marcella, do you have anything to add about the village water? I just want to make sure that there's nothing that we're missing in terms of accessing the data from the water department.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So right now, the water department, the easiest way to get that data is to contact our water billing department and ask them for your year-end number. And they have been giving that information to some of the other facilities that we've been working with. Going forward, the last bill of the year will have your annual whole building usage on it. Kind of similar to, I just want to say, like, it's not just the common areas, it's all the units. So you just want the whole building usage. And then we are hoping that we're planning that once we have our new water billing infrastructure and metering software up running next year, that we'll be able to have a more seamless experience for you going forward as well. But for right now, we want to contact the water billing department.
Great, thank you, Marcella. I see a couple of questions in the chat, one from Jim. Will we send out these step-by-step instructions via email? Yes. After today, you will get a follow-up email from Maddie Lippett from Mia, and she is going to cover everything that we covered today so that you can understand that. And then if there's anything that isn't clear, feel free to email us or call us. That's why we're here. I also see a question in the chat, is the ComEd data system just for buildings with multiple occupants meters? No, I mean, the nice thing about it is if you wanted to, you could access from ComEd your entire year's worth instead of having to go through, like let's say you're just one building and you're just one tenant. You may think, oh, I don't want ComEd to have to do that because it's only for multiple tenants, but that's not true because number one, they can give you the entire 12 months of data all at once for each month, which is really nice because then you don't have to look through all of your old bills. And then additionally, once you get signed up, like Katie was saying, if you want, you can use the automatic upload feature just for your electric bills that will then just automatically populate at the end of every month the total for that building. And so you don't ever have to look at your electric bills for enter them into Portfolio Manager again. So it's for all buildings. Great. Okay, then so feel free to ask other questions about getting utility data. We're going to move on to the building characteristic information now. If you go on to the next slide. So the way Portfolio Manager works is, and we will explain all of this to you at the Data Jam, but you basically will sign up with an account and then you will set up each building separately. And in order to do this the most accurately, you need to have specific information about your building. So all buildings in Portfolio Manager require these specific data points. So you create a property name, you can have it be whatever you want. Maybe you already call the building something. You need the property address, gross floor area, irrigated area, the year that it was built, and the occupancy, which is like a percentage of the space, number of buildings, because sometimes like a campus, for example, might be set up as a whole campus rather than individual buildings. And then as we mentioned, you need that 12 months of consecutive data, and we're asking for that for 12 consecutive months of data. So I'm gonna just again pop it over to Katie because she knows the most questions that we get about these things. And there she put that into the chat already. But Katie, do you just want to explain gross floor area quickly? And then go ahead.
Sure. The gross floor area is not the leasable space or not the rentable space, but it's what's the total internal square foot that's heated and cooled, conditioned space using electricity in your building. So it's the building itself, not the lot size and not anything else. There'll be other questions that Portfolio Manager will ask you, asking if there's parking on site. And then you can, if you do have parking on site, it'll ask what the square footage of the parking is, because it's estimating you probably also have lighting with your parking and that uses energy. But for the gross floor area, it's the internal square footage of the building. And if you don't know what that is, there's a really cool estimator tool that Allison and Maddie will send you guys later to help you figure that out. And I also would say the one piece that I get a lot of questions about, and it sounds like there's multiple buildings here that have multiple use types within it. When you start setting up your account, the first thing it's going to ask you is, what is the primary use type of your building? So what part of your building has the most square footage? So is it, for the folks that said it was a worship facility and you also have a school, is the school the most square footage, or is the worship facility the most square footage? And so just something to think about when you're filling out those worksheets. And also if the buildings are completely separate and have their own meter, or if they're connected. And so that might be a question we get into later with individual circumstances, where we might want to benchmark those buildings separately versus together if they have their own meter and they're not connected. So just something to think about for your own property as we're talking and continue through.
Great, thank you. Yesterday we had a good question about irrigated area, and that's basically if your building, for example, has like some yard space or some green space around it, and if you have like a sprinkler system or irrigation area, that's because this is not just an energy benchmarking, they're also trying to understand your water consumption as well. And so, for example, if you don't have any irrigation, they would expect that your water will be less. But if you have more, if you do have an irrigation system, they want to know how large it is, because then they can say, oh, wow, even with an irrigation system, you really aren't using that much water for a building of your size or use type or something. And so that's why they ask those kinds of questions. That's the same reason why they ask about occupancy, is they're going to want to know what percentage of the building is occupied, because they want to compare that. For example, actually, if we go to, not right this second, but you'll see in a minute that for some spaces, they want to know what the worker hours are. And that's because they want to know, is this a 24-hour facility? And if we compare that against other 24-hour facilities, then what is the energy consumption? Yeah, so Peggy asks about occupancy. How is that defined? We have some employees who work remotely part-time. So number one, the worksheets that were sent out to you all should have some blue hyperlinks on them if you're actually like clicking on them and not printing them out. And Portfolio Manager is great about how it explains occupancy. But Katie, I don't know if you have a quick definition off the top of your head that you want to provide, because I know you do this all the time.
I was just typing my answer. But really it's trying to define how much energy is being used at the building. And so how many people are at the building using computers, having lights on, breathing air, having conditioned space and ventilated space. And so it's really talking about what's the occupancy of the building. So if your office space is one big space and only half the people are working there, it's probably 100% occupied. You don't have other tenant space that's just not being used at all. If the light's on and the space is being heated and cooled, then I would call that occupied space.
Right. So I think that we determined that unless there's like a part of the space that is off limits to people, then you would probably consider it 100% occupied. Correct, Katie?
Because you're still going to put a number of computers and people on the shift. So it's going to think about that, but I wouldn't include remote workers as people on the shift, because you want to just talk about people in the building.
Great. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So this is for all building characteristics. And now I'm going to go through some of the characteristics of some of the specific buildings. And just because I didn't think I heard anybody had multifamily housing, but sometimes when we have buildings, like we may have some retail or office space on the first floor, and then we have multifamily on, higher floors. And for that reason, then you need to actually put in the two different use types for it. So this is a multifamily housing example. Like I said, I don't think I heard anybody here has that. So I'm going to skip over this one for the time being, but if you do have some questions about multifamily housing, let us know and we can go back to that one. But now we're going to go through some of the, we asked you to fill out in the beginning when you signed up what your building type is. And so we tried to include all the ones that we know about into this presentation. So let's go to office. So Katie, do you have anything that you want to mention about this? You talked about the number of workers on main shift, the weekly operating hours. So gross floor area, we know like the weekly operating hours would be, for example, let's say your building is only in use Monday through Friday, for 9 to 5, then that's what you would put into the worksheet, and then that's what you would enter into Portfolio Manager. Let's say you have a religious space, for example, and then a school. So you're going to have those two use types, and they will be different because maybe the actual church and worship space is used with very different operating hours than what the school is used. And so you're going to want to know for each different use type, you know, what is the number of computers, what are the operating hours, and the gross floor area of that use type as well. So it's not just for the whole building, but if you have a separate, if you have more than one use, then you're going to want to know the gross floor area of that particular use as well.
I would just, can I just add, Allison,
yes.
for this one? You may have a church worship facility that has an office in it. You don't need to separate out office space here. Portfolio manager assumes that a worship facility would have an office space. This is only if it's a large additional space to be used, like more than 5,000 square feet is a separate use type than the main type. So like if you have a school, certainly the school has offices in it. You don't need to add separate square footage for the office space within the school. This is just if there's, you know, a tenant that is office that's different from maybe another use type within the building.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. I realized that was confusing as I started talking about churches. So I do see a question up in the chat about what is the score, and that's a good question. So as we talked about buildings being compared against each other and trying to get an understanding of how your building might compare to another similar building, some buildings are eligible to receive an actual score through Energy Star that rates their performance. Not all building use types are eligible, and that's why it says that here. But if it is eligible, you may come out and after you're done benchmarking, it may give you a score, and then you'll be able to compare that score to other buildings of the same kind. And if your score ranks high enough, then you can actually get like an Energy Star like plaque for having a high performing building. Let's see, what is the school in the church? What if the school in the church actually shares some of the rooms, but on different days? So
I would say the church, the worship facility portion, you're talking about the square footage of the worship facility. And then you're separately talking about the square footage of the school classrooms. And so I can talk with you afterwards, Karen, about that specific instance and how to divide that out, the square footage wise, and then the operating hours for each of those different use types.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Katie. This next question is really, really important. So Joe asks, we're going to require employees to come back at least 2 days a week starting in October. And they even know the days of the week, which is great. Currently, people have the option of fully remote. Do I input future occupancy in October or current? So first of all, the utility data that we're going to be entering in for this first part is going to be from 2022. So you're going to want to look at what was actually happening in 2022. And let's say in 2022, people were fully remote the entire time. Then, then the building is really not operating at 100% occupancy. And then when you have to do 2023 data, you're going to want to keep it as it, had been all through 2023, where, people had the option and most people were fully remote. And then starting in October, you're actually going to change it so that your occupancy changes to reflect now that you have more people there. And that is actually really important to do for portfolio manager. If you have a change of occupancy or any other significant change that would affect the energy use of the building, you want to change the characteristics of the building like we're talking about, if possible, because it will help you get an accurate reading on how your building is performing. Katie, do you have anything to add to that? I feel like you probably have some good insight there.
No, I think that you got that right. I mean, the whole piece of setting that property up correctly to begin with, is so that it's showing you how your energy is used in the building most accurately, like Allison said. So if any major changes happened in that time period, you want to make those updates to the profile, and that'll be more clear to you once we're setting it up during the data jam. You'll see where some of those numbers that we're putting in for your building characteristics, if something changes with that, you might want to go update that in addition to entering your utility data next year.
Absolutely. And so as we see on this, and again, this is just for office space, it's actually office space, and that's the main use of the space, and is a large amount of space. You'll see on here percentage that can be cooled, and that's required to get an Energy Star score. But then they have some optional that's not necessarily for that, but still provides really good insight. And I would say if you're able to provide all of the information that they're asking for, you're going to get a better understanding of how your building is performing and what could change to potentially make it better. And then I see on the questions too, what is the range of scores? Good, excellent. It's actually a 1 to 100 score, and each building type has a different potential, like what they call an EUI, which is an energy use intensity, and then buildings are rated based on what the typical average energy use intensity for that type of building is, and then how much you exceed that in terms of like better performance is how they rate the criteria for the Energy Star score. We can certainly provide a lot more information on that if you're interested. I'm going to move on though right now because I just want to make sure we're talking about stuff about the data jam and what people need to bring. So let's go on to the next slide. So that was just office. And then this one I think is going to be most important because I've heard that there's a lot of worship facility buildings on the call. So, you know, what you're going to need to know is weekly operating hours, and that includes, you know, daily too, because maybe Sundays you guys are a lot more open, or Saturdays. And so if you have specific days where the operating hours are different, you're going to want to note that. And again, think about 2022 and not necessarily what might be going forward. You're going to want to know the seating capacity, and then how much of your floor area is used for food preparation. And again, we're thinking about energy here. So they want to know that because they want to know if you have like some stoves or like refrigerators that use a lot of energy and that sort of thing. And then the percentage that can be heated and the percentage that can be cooled. And then there's also some optional stuff. So, you know, like down here, the cooking facilities, there's some questions. So if you'll want to click on that on your worksheet to understand what they're asking for that, the number of the weekdays that you're open, the number of computers that you have, because again, you know, computers take up energy. And so if you don't have any computers, then that needs to be recognized. But maybe for some, maybe you have a computer lab in, you know, or you know, a place where people can come and use computers, and so it's more than a typical worship facility might have. Then that would be something that should be recognized, so that people, so that the software understands that that's where your energy use is coming from, and then the number of commercial refrigeration or freezer units. Katie, I know you've done a lot of work with worship facilities. Do you have anything else to add here?
The only thing I'd add is to think about too, if you rent the space out or use it for other things, like if there's always a Saturday night thing too, that someone else is using it for, that's still using energy. And so think about that in your operating hours. It might not just be when the church is using the facility, but it also might be when, you know, other nonprofit groups or other school groups or other people are able to use it. So if it's regular enough that it's used pretty often, I would include that in the operating hours.
Yeah, I see Karen Doty had asked, she says, agreed with the above questions, as well as Sunday school classrooms. Churches building use is fluid. The meeting space can technically be used 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Sunday through Saturday, but it's not the same. So, you know, just provide an estimate. But I think to me, I would put the operating hours as that, if that's what the operating hours are.
Right. If the lights are on and the heating and cooling is running, that's, I think, what they're thinking about the most here for operating hours.
And then I see a question about seating capacity for the whole building or just the primary worship space. What about meeting rooms, etc.?
It's the primary worship space,
Yeah.
but again, like Allison said, if you hover over any of these blue links in the worksheet or in the PowerPoint when we send this out later, you can see the definition that Portfolio Manager wants you to use here. And we can help clarify that if you have further questions, or if it's not set up in a typical way. But it's generally how many, like, what's the most people that can be in the worship facility on, that, in that day or time when that's full.
Right. And they're asking about capacity, not like how many are actually there. Like they want to know what would be the max capacity. And then one question from Michelle: is the data entered into Energy Star Portfolio Manager publicly reporting this information in our energy use data, or is it anonymous? So there's a couple of things here. So the first thing is, when you put this into Portfolio Manager yourself in your account, it will be private just to you. Energy Star does take that information and use it to help populate scores, but your particular building will not be publicly available unless you make it publicly available. But part of this benchmarking ordinance is to report this information to the city. So the easiest way to do that is to give the city access to your account so that they can see it. And then it sounds like the village in 2024 is going to make the data public. And Marcella, maybe you want to explain how that's going to look to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the ordinance is data transparency. So yes, when you're after all the reporting is in, we will be developing a web page on our village website where all of the covered buildings are listed with their energy, a limited amount of the energy data up there, like the Energy Star score. If you're curious about what this might look like, Evanston has a similar page on its website. It's basically a spreadsheet. And it's meant to really reward those folks who are doing well. And we'll also be, of course, posting our village and other, governing partners who wish to have their data. Is kind of show our progress in energy.
Great, thanks, Marcella. I'm just looking through the chat and make sure I didn't miss any others. Okay. So are there any other questions about worship facilities before I move on to other building use types? And again, you all feel free to reach out through email or otherwise if you have any questions about this. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And this also K through 12 example. So I think that some of you had said that you have an attached school with some classrooms. And so for the classroom part, these are the characteristics that you're going to need to know about. So, again, gross floor area just for the schools itself, the number of workers, if you have weekend operations, if the school is open beyond 9 to 5 school hours, if there are cooking facilities on the school portion, and then the percentage of the school that can be heated and cooled. And then there's also some optional information, including what is the student seating capacity, how many months are you using it? So for example, are you doing it during, is it open in the summer or is it open during the quote unquote school year? How many computers does the school have? And then the area itself for food preparation for the school, if applicable, and if there's refrigeration or freezers for the school, if there's a gym for the school, and then even the school district itself. I would also say sometimes they ask about pools. I know some schools have pools, and so that's like a whole separate question. But all of these things, again, if you look at that worksheet, you can hover over the blue link and it should give you an explanation. But if you have questions about it, just let us know. So I know we did have some people with schools. Are there any questions about that right now while we're here? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Let's go to the next slide. So we have a movie theater example, and then actually let's go to the next slide as well. And a performing arts example, because I think we have a performing arts school and then a theater. There, it's the same. So that's why I say that the characteristics are the same that's required. So we have like the building characteristics that all the buildings need, and then for performing arts and theaters, we need to know the gross floor area of just that space itself, the operating hours, how many people are working most of the time on the main shift, and then how many computers are there.
And the reason it has less information here too is portfolio manager and the people that made this software are taking into account that movie theaters look like movie theaters for the most part. They have a certain amount of space, and they're, set up in similar ways, similar to a performing arts school. It's going to have similar types of spaces that are set up differently than maybe a school classroom. And so it's calculating those scores or the energy use intensity a little bit differently. And so it doesn't need you to put in all of those other really specific details.
Right. It just takes it into consideration. Thanks, Katie. Okay. Any questions about theater or performing arts? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So it's senior living community example. And so this one will have gross floor area for the senior living facility. And so sometimes I know that that can be like its own thing. Maybe it's attached to something else. But for the most part, a senior living community takes all of the different aspects of that community, of that senior living facility, and puts it into one. So you don't have to, for example, if there's an office, you don't have to take the office out and have it be its like own use type. The senior facility or the portfolio manager understands that senior living communities will have an office in them, and they understand that they will have like a food preparation place. And so you don't need to like have a separate restaurant, or anything like that. So, so you need to know the gross floor area, the maximum resident capacity, and then the average number of residents, and the total number of residential living units. And that should be like the actual separate living spaces, kind of like apartments or condos or however it's called. You want to know the number of the living units, the number of workers on the main shift, the number of computers. And Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but the computers piece for this is just for the workers in the senior living community. It's not
Right.
if any of the residents have computers in their units.
It's not taken in consideration like plug loads in individual units, but the office.
And then is that the same thing for residential washing machines? Like if somebody has a washing machine in their unit, or is it just
I would hover over on these. I think in senior living, it's assuming that these are two separate things. So the residential washing machines would be the ones in their units. And so that could be 0 if there are none. And the commercial washing machines would be things that are being used for like towels and linens and anything that's more common space.
So question then, as
Yep.
far as, so I know with Energy Star, you have to be at a 50% occupancy, but that said, the number of occupants using washing machines is going to skew the usage of water, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But utilities are going to fluctuate.
I think, yeah. I mean, how your bill, when you're entering your utility bill information, it's gonna even that out so that it's going to assume, you know, a certain amount of the energy is being used for the washers and dryers versus the computers versus the lights and electricity. So I think this is just getting an average of like, how's energy being used if you have washing machines, or if you don't, it's going to put a percentage of the energy use towards that idea.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Mhm.
And then the number of residential electronic lift systems, is that the same as an elevator, or is that like a lift system, like stair lift?
This is not referring to an elevator. This is like a lift equipment to move a resident from one place to another.
Yes, okay. Thank you. And then the number of commercial fridges and freezers, and then the percentage of the building that can be heated and that can be cooled. And then there's an optional one too, for the licensed bed capacity. So thank you for that question. Are there any other questions about senior living facilities? Okay, let's move on to the next one. And this is a medical office. And so this one is, you know, similar to some of the others. You know, you need to know the gross floor area, the operating hours, the number of workers on the main shift, but then they want to know how many surgical operating beds and MRI machines might be in that medical office. And again, that's just to have an understanding of where the energy might be going to. And then there's some optional as well, which is the number of computers, the surgery floor area, and then the percentage of heating and cooling. Let's see, we have several refrigerators and washer dryer. Where is that entered? So Peggy, I'm not remembering which use type you have. But what I would say is that if it doesn't specifically ask, you're a medical clinic, okay. And dental. Yeah, that's a good question.
I think that's okay. It's more about if this is a commercial size fridge or freezer, is I think what they're asking here. So if it's just a regular, you have a refrigerator in the building, that is, I think, taken into account that it's a possibility in like a break room or something like that. But if it's more of a commercial size fridge, I can talk to you separately about how to maybe document that.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, Katie, maybe we should look and make sure that we're giving her the correct medical description. Because I know that there's different medical building use types, and maybe there's a different use type that looks like it fits your facility more. Does that make sense, Katie?
Yeah, I'll look into that. I think that might be the case.
Okay, so Peggy, we'll walk through this with you just to make sure on that. But these are good questions, and sometimes they don't ask those specific type of questions because they assume that there's going to be, like, just as an example, maybe a certain number of vaccine refrigerators per square footage or something. Like they just kind of have that in there. And so they don't ask people about it, but it does kind of sound like maybe we just need to guarantee that we've given you the right use type for what your building actually is. So thank you for that question. Are there any other questions on medical offices, medical buildings? Okay, let's go to the next example. So this is for a retail store. And so we have some of the similar ones that we've already looked at, including gross floor area, operating hours, the number of workers on the main shift. And then we have a couple that are a little bit different about open and closed refrigerator, freezer units. You know, this is if you have something that needs to be kept cold, and people will be opening and closing it a lot. And then also maybe a walk-in refrigerator freezer unit, because obviously that would use a lot of energy as well. I'm not sure what single store means. Does that just mean it's like just a one-off building that's all by itself and isn't connected to any other retail space?
I believe so. I can look that up though while we're talking.
Okay. And then if there's an exterior entrance to the public, so this would really be like, so for example, this wouldn't be part of it if your retail space was being shared with somebody else and like you entered into the building and like I mean, you wouldn't necessarily do this, but let's say that there's like a pharmacy or some kind of like gift shop or something that takes up a large part of a building, and then there's medical facilities around it, then maybe you would want that retail store to be different, but there's no entrance that actually goes to the outside for that retail space. You can only enter it from the inside of a different building. So if you have an exterior entrance to the public, so Tori, you're asking about the retail space. How large is your retail space in like percentage wise to your building?
I would have to do the math, but I don't even think it would equal like 1%.
Okay, then no. If it's small, then you don't have to do anything for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then the percentage that can be heated and that can be cooled for that. And then there's some optional information that you can provide, which includes number of computers and cash registers, if there's a cooking facility on the site, and then the length and the area of all of those refrigeration and freezer units. So any other questions on retail spaces? Okay, and then let's go to the next slide. Okay, and then this was the office example. So I think we went over that. So anyway, so that is the bulk of what we have for you all today. So again, you need to bring a laptop. And please let us know if you don't have one, and then we can supply one for you. And then you need to fill out your worksheets for each building. And so please let us know if you have any additional questions about the building characteristics on that. And then 1 year's worth of utility data. So from January 1, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. And we will send you the information about how to access that that utility data, including signing up for that ComEd, and then calling NICOR, and then calling the Village of Oak Park's water department. And then here is a number of different people that you can reach out to. We're so happy to help you answer these questions. And I really do hope that you're feeling a little bit more prepared for this. It is not, I think once it gets demystified, and also once you all start putting your information into Portfolio Manager, you're going to really understand how exciting and neat that it can be to look at the data and then compare it to other buildings. But I know that it probably sounds really, or at least before this meeting, sounded like very nebulous and kind of difficult, and maybe it was going to be a lot of work. And so we're hoping that we're taking the bulk of that work away from you. And in the meantime, yes, please reach out to us. And it looks like Katie's going to send that to Peggy. And I'm just looking, there we go. Okay, so before we take off today, are there any other additional questions, comments, or concerns from anyone here?
You said,
oh, go ahead.
This is Mary Martin. You said that there was mixed use buildings had more information. You didn't bring that up at all. So how do I find out about that?
Oh, so Mary, I'm sorry that I wasn't more clear. So if you have a mixed use building, for example, we had been talking about some of those worship facilities that have a school, that would be considered mixed use because some of the building is used as a worship facility and then some of it is used as a school. So that's when I said I was talking about mixed use. So another example of a mixed use building that I brought up was if you have multifamily on the top and you have retail down below. So essentially what you want to do is you want, if you think you have a mixed use building, you want to think about what the largest use types are. And maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 25-75%. And then for those different use types, you'll fill out like a different sheet for those use types so that you can get that accurate information. What is your building use type?
Well, it's extremely variable. There's a Tai Chi studio. There's a roofer that uses it for storage and a little bit of workshop. There's a hairdresser. There's an exercise studio. There's a yoga studio. There's an art lesson and gallery with a small amount of vintage retail space.
Oh, so exciting. I love that. Let's actually set up a call so that we can talk through it, because some of it may need to be separated and then some of it may not need to be separated at all. So if we can go through and just see what the square footages of the different use types are, because some use types, when they're so small, then it wouldn't even make a difference to have it be broken out. So yeah, let's do that. But that's exciting. That sounds like a fun building.
Well, and the usage is also extremely variable because people have different schedules that constantly change. So there's 7-day-a-week use, but it's extremely limited and extremely variable according to when somebody decides to have a class or decides to have their space open for something. So
absolutely. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, we can figure out a like an average way to kind of think about that. So you don't have to be updating it like, oh, now they're switching classes to Tuesdays or something. Like we can figure out something so that it'll be more just like on an average basis.
So I contact you?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Mary. And I think that I have your contact information already, but yeah, and I'm
I have my
Allison.
email.
Okay, perfect.
No,
Go ahead.
No, I think I probably have the same confusion as Mary. Because when I first got the postcard or whatever to sign up, I guess I just assumed it was asking for only the movie theater because that's, I don't know, 27,000 of the 30,000. But now listening to this meeting, it sounds like you're then also telling me to get electric bills for the 3 tenants, but I don't have to factor in any of their use.
So it's a theater building, but then there's also tenant space.
So it's, I mean, that's what I'm trying to confirm, and maybe Oak Park has to answer this. Am I looking at just the theater square footage of this area, or when they say the building?
Corey, we're going by sort of the building envelope. So who is within your building envelope?
So I've got, I mean, it's Jerusalem Cafe, the Lake Theater, the Candle Shop, and then Wise Cup.
Okay, so you've got like 4 businesses in the same building, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what you need is the whole building energy use for everybody. So that would include all 4 businesses. And that's where something where ComEd should be able to help, right, Allison? They could give her the entire building energy.
Right. So you don't have to go and ask the tenants themselves for their bills. ComEd will be able to provide it for the entire building. And it won't be broken down per tenant. It will just show you, the entire building, including the theater, including, and they'll do that by, once you tell them what the address is for the, or addresses, because I'm sure there's, different addresses for some of the different tenants, then they will pull multiple meters if that's what they need to do for that whole building. And then they'll just give you the aggregated number on a monthly basis.
Okay.
So, yeah. But we can also talk about the square footage is the same way that I'm going to talk to Mary, just to give her, like, to give you an idea of which ones you may or may not need to break down, depending on what
Okay.
your square footage is. Because like I said,
Okay.
like if there's a really small one, then you probably don't want to, you may not want to do that. But it sounded like you have one that might be like a coffee shop or something. And so like you would probably want to have that broken out because they may use, because they, you know, have different kind of like they have the refrigeration systems and they're using maybe like some gas or something. You would want to have that recognized as part of the building, because if you just called the whole thing a theater, theaters don't usually use a lot of gas. You know what I mean?
Right.
So by having that be distinct, you're going to get an accurate representation of what your building is actually consuming.
Okay.
So yeah.
So if we decide that I need to separate it out from the ComEd standpoint, I would need individual address information.
No, even if you separate it in portfolio manager, it'll still be considered a whole building, and they will, because we'll be able to say, like, the only thing you'll want to know for portfolio manager is what the square footage of a separated portion is. But from the ComEd perspective and all the other utilities perspective, you're still just going to put in the one building data, like as a conglomerate number for all of it. It'll make more sense when we're in portfolio manager, but essentially you set up the building, and then the building can be broken out into different use types for square footage. And then the building itself, you enter in the utility data and it's considered one building. So, yeah.
But for asking for the data though, from NICOR and from ComEd, Tori, if it is a different address, technically, like if it's like, 431 state or 433, there's a place to add those additional addresses associated with the building when you're requesting the data. And you'll want to do the same thing with NICOR. If there's different meters, or if the billing address that they might be getting it to has a different number, even though it's still the full same building, I would give them all those addresses so that they're pulling every meter associated with that facility.
Okay.
And again, Allison and I are happy to talk. Every building is so unique. It's not one thing we say is going to explain it for everybody, but happy to have offline chats with folks to help.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I promise once this gets all figured out and we get this put into portfolio manager, the rest of it is going to be a breeze. Like it's going to be a lot easier. So we just got to figure this out one time pretty much. And then it will be good. So doing this heavy lifting now is important. And then after that, it'll just be annual reporting is all that's required. So great. So I have on my list that Mary and Tori may want to talk offline. And it sounds like Peggy and Katie are going to talk a little bit too. I also see in the chat, Eric has said, can we go over occupancy in religious and schools again? So Eric, I'm assuming you're talking about, I don't know, do you just want to speak up and ask specifically occupancy? Are you talking about like the division of square footage, or are you talking about like percentage of occupancy?
Probably both would be useful.
Okay, so let's say that you have a building that is you have your worship space and then you have a school attached to it, but it's all one building. So you're going to, yes, Peggy, you can sign off now if you like. Anybody else can sign off too if you're don't want to listen to this. So if there is you have your worship space, and let's say that that's 1/3 of the total square footage, and then 2/3 of it is for the school, that then you will call it all one building, but then you'll want to know the individual gross square footage of the worship space. And then you will, portfolio manager will have a worship space drag down, and you will call that worship space, and then you will say like, like it'll ask you, what is the maximum capacity of this space? And so you'll be like, oh, it's 100 people. And the operating hours for the worship space are generally, you know, whatever it is. And then maybe the school is used more as all the time. And so then that one is, okay, it's 2/3 of the space. So I know the general square footage of that space. It's open, you know, basically all the time except for nighttime. And it's open because it's a school. So I drop it down and I assign that the school amount or the school use type. I hope that is making sense. And then the occupancy for the school is like, I think it says like how many seats for students. So, you know, you're going to count how many chairs or basically like, even if you have a school, you probably know what your maximum capacity for students is, and then you would use that. Does that make sense? I hope I'm getting at your question, but please let me know if I'm not.
Is there a percentage I'm looking for? Like, is it like, no, okay. All right, I guess that's what I was interested in.
Yeah, I was just using percentage to be more general.
It's like square feet. What's the square footage? So what's the gross square footage of the whole building? And then what's the square footage of the school space versus the square footage of the worship facility space?
Sure. I didn't know if occupancy also meant like percentage of total, like, so if I had 10 units and only 7 units are occupied, that 70% occupancy that's not interested. You're not interested in that for probably mixed use buildings like churches and schools, or
I think only you want to make sure it's for the 2022 calendar year, so the year of when the data you're talking about.
Sure.
So what was the occupancy during that, average occupancy during that time frame? And if there's specific living units, I think we should chat about that too, because that sounds like another use type.
No, that was just an example. Like, I mean, so I've got a fair number that part of the building was not used in 2022. So I didn't know if you meant occupancy as in unoccupied square footage, or I didn't know how you were handling that.
I guess I mean, we can talk about it further, but you know, it's not occupied, but was it heated and cooled, and were the lights on? Like some facilities, like if you turn the lights on in the building, the lights are on everywhere.
Sure.
Or you have more controls over where those spaces are conditioned or using electricity. So I would just get into a couple more nuances with you just to make sure that it was reflecting your usage accurately.
Yeah, I mean, I understand you're just doing like the best you can do. So
yeah,
sure.
It's Karen. I have questions, still have questions about church versus school. In that for occupancy, even though the school has some classrooms that operate completely independently, we do share some. At times the school is not using it. They also sometimes use some of our general meeting rooms with permission. But in general, all of the spaces owned by the church that are not occupied by the school exclusively during the day, they're open for our congregation to suddenly hold a meeting, you know. So that's why I don't understand how we're going to do occupancy, because I wouldn't be able to go back in 2022 and estimate how many people were in that room, you know, how many times that day. I mean,
it's more of a percentage, Karen. So like, it sounds like at any point across the average of the year, that space is used 100% of the time, or it's used 90% of the time. And so it's just trying to get a use and a reflection of like, once you put all your utility data in there, you know, there's a bunch of usage. And so it's trying to figure out, is your building using energy very efficiently or not? And so knowing the percentage of time that it's, if you put a really low percentage of occupancy, but you have a lot of usage, it's going to reflect that your building is not using energy very effectively. So you know what I mean? And so I'm happy to chat with you more on like how to break it out more specifically. But that's generally what it's asking and why. And so it doesn't need to be like super accurate, but more of like, an average of the year of like spaces being used and lights on and space being conditioned or heated.
Got it. And
Cool.
then will that website we can access with ComEd, will that also reflect if we have a subscription to a solar farm separate from ComEd?
So ComEd is still delivering the electricity.
Right.
It'll ask you some questions when you're setting up your electricity meter in Portfolio Manager, and we can do that during the data jam if there's community solar or another on-site renewables, we can add that in. It's still, you have a total usage for the year, but some of it might be renewable energy, so it might impact your greenhouse gas emissions calculation or like another calculation that Portfolio Manager provides for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Well, we are past time, and thank you, everyone. Are there any additional questions? I want to be cognizant of your time, so if you need to jump off, feel free, but is there any other questions from anyone?
I have a question about the time because it said it was 3 hours and it said we were supposed to attend at least the first 90 minutes and then hopefully attend the second 90 minutes, which sounds like that's not at all what the setup is.
Yeah, there's not going to be a second 90 minutes for this prep meeting, but there is going to be the data jam in September where we actually sit down and get all this information into Portfolio Manager. And if you only have one building, just as an example, then that data jam, you may not need to stay for that full amount of time either. But we just have that one slated, I think, for 3 hours because some people have 27 buildings to benchmark. So if it may not take the full amount of time for the data jam, the full data jam in September as well.
Do you know the date and time for that right off the top of your head?
I believe
it's the 18th.
One of them is the 18th and one of them is the 19th. Hold on. The 18th is the one for multifamily building owners because they have a kind of a different set of criteria and different questions. And then the commercial one, which is what this is the 19th of September, and that's starting at 11 a.m. And so we will follow up with everybody with an email with the information that was shared today, including the slides. So, if you really want to look back on the slides will be shared. And then also a recording of this will also be shared with you all. So if you want to go back and re-listen to something, that will be available to you. Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Marcella. Do you have anything to end with?
Yes, thank you for attending. Please feel free to reach out if you need any water billing data. We'll directly to the water billing department or to us, and we'll get you through. Appreciate everybody's time today, and looking forward to working with you in the next workshop.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in September. And for some of you, we'll be doing some outreach before then too, just to get some clarification on things. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.